Yeah, I've had several questions from people, and I think I can kind of knock most of them out in one video. Before I forget it, somebody asked me if I'm on Facebook. I actually do have a Facebook account, but it's more just family, personal stuff. Nothing to do with the channel. You know, I'm not into the big promotion deal. But even that, I really don't care for Facebook. I mean, I don't hardly use it except like for some family stuff. But uh, I will probably just shed that altogether pretty soon. You know, a lot of that kind of stuff I kind of like to back away from. Okay, another guy asked about simple canning, and then somebody also asked, how do I get by without refrigeration? Well, this will work good to do both of those because it is canning that I do a lot of, and not, you know, when you think of canning, you think of like a long-term food storage. And I do some of that, but I do also a lot of the short-term stuff. Like this weekend, I made a pork roast and a beef roast. Well, I make enough, I can have one meal, then I can the rest. And I do a lot of canning, like this is pork roast, in these half-pint jars because they are just the right enough for a meal, you know, for one person. That's a good chunk of meat. So I always do that. You know, I make, if I'm going to make something, it isn't harder to make it in a bigger quantity, throw it in a canner. And that's, you need a pressure canner for that. But somebody talked about simple canning, and I know what he means. A lot of times, like if you start looking at the information on canning and videos on canning, they can make it to the level like you're trying to build an atomic bomb, and it isn't like that. I mean, it's a pretty simple procedure. Takes a little bit of equipment and a little bit of caution, but it's not that hard to do, especially things like tomatoes and stuff. That anything you can do in a water bath canner, so pretty straightforward. And these run about 20-25 bucks new, but you can usually pick these up in thrift stores for like 5 bucks. Main thing is to watch, make sure they have the jar rack in there. You do need that, you know, so that's the only thing to watch for. And on used ones, kind of check the enamel over pretty. If the enamel gets chipped up, they don't last very long. But if they're in good shape, you know. But like I say, new ones not so bad. You just don't want to beat them up. You know, pressure canners. If you're going to do any kind of meats or like carrots and potatoes, a lot of that kind of stuff, any low acid foods has to be in a pressure canner. Now they turn up too on rummage sales and thrift stores. This is a Presto, I believe. Yeah, that I've had for a few years. These are about 75 bucks new. But there again, you can usually run into something like this or even a smaller version that'll do the job. And get them fairly cheap because a lot of people are nervous about them, though really, these things are extremely safe. They've got, you know, like there's a weight that lets the excess pressure off, you know, so and there's a gauge and there's a fuse. And these I like in that they have a little plunger that comes up when there's pressure, and that actually locks the lid so you can't be stupid enough. You know, it's pretty foolproof because you can't open it if they got pressure on. It will not allow it to turn. But a pretty foolproof setup and easy enough to operate. And like I say, I like it for doing quick, you know, half dozen cans or something or another. You know, like I did some hamburger yesterday. Just, you know, quick dish to have on hand. These are actually pork sausage links, you know, that are spiced and or patties, you know, that are made to go, and that works good. But like I say, I tend to do it in smaller amounts and use them like short-term stuff because I've found it before. If I go and make something in a big quantity, like the one year I canned potatoes, which are handy to can and work very well, but I can them in quart jars. Well, I don't do that anymore. I can them in pint jars because a quart of potatoes was too much. Like if you're going to make fried potatoes, a quart was too much for one person. The other thing I do a lot in quarts is tomatoes, and tomatoes are the easiest thing in the world to can. You know, any fool can can tomatoes. But when somebody talks about canning, the one thing I always recommend is that Ball Blue Book. Now, there's a lot of information out there, but you know, like the guy said, sometimes they get really complicated, and even it's a thin book. But really, what you're looking for is basic, like times and pressures and stuff like that. You know, you want to keep it as simple as you can. This is pretty good. You know, there's a lot bigger books, but what they tend to turn into is recipe books, and I ain't so much interested in recipes. In fact, there again is another thing. Like I say, recipes, they tend to want you to make up something with a lot of different ingredients, but then you're locked into that particular thing. Like I'll do it, I'd sooner have like the tomatoes and the hamburger, you know, have them canned separately, and then I can make something out of it rather than have it already made up. You know, I would sooner have the ingredients ready to work with. I do like spaghetti sauce, I make that ahead, and chili I make ahead, but it is nice, you know, to have the separate ingredients. There's a lot of ways you can go with that, especially in the meat products. Like this beef roast is the handiest thing in the world and makes a terrific meal, but you can go so many ways with it, you know, and that's what I like. And it's already cooked because, like I say, I roast the crap out of it, and then I can it. But you could actually just drain the juice off of this and make sandwiches out of it. You know, it's ready to go as it is. But they're very nice, they're handy, very convenient. It's hard for me to keep those in supply. I tend to, you know, you get home late in the evening and you want a quick meal, they're easy to go at. But that's how I get around refrigeration. I try not to, you know, I've done it before in the past. I've had like a propane refrigerator. I do have now you know, and the propane, that works fine, but then you have to keep an eye, you know, because you run out of propane, all of a sudden you're counting on this refrigerator and you got a whole fridge full of stuff that isn't cold. So I did that when I was milking cows, but I kind of lost interest in the propane. It's a constant having to buy propane, though they're efficient. You know, I could run a month on a tank, but still, you know, it's an expense I didn't need. I try to keep it simpler than that. There are refrigerators that work pretty good, and I have one that I use now and again that are the small, I guess you'd call them dorm room size. But what they are, the thing to look for is the thermoelectric ones, not the compressor type. The compressor type take too much power. The thermoelectric take as much as like a 60 watt or 40 watt light bulb. They don't pull a lot of power. So they can actually be run off an inverter. And like when I have the wind charger running, I'm able to run the refrigerator off of the wind charger. Or a lot of times it's a 120. So if I'm running the generator for something else, I can also be running that refrigerator and cooling things down with that. Let's see if there's anything else I can try to cover at the same time. Well, okay, what I will do, like I say, I recommend this book. I've always recommended this book, though Kerr makes another one that's very similar to this. And they're both good. They give you the basics and not get out of hand. And like I say, for equipment, you can get by pretty cheap, like even the jars. A lot of the jars I'm using are stuff that actually, some of them were my grandmother's that went to Ma, and then I've got them, you know. So you can get into equipment fairly reasonable. And it really pays off, just in convenience. But like I say, these books can be hard to find. They tend to sell out of them. And they're only like a $5 book. So the other day when I was in town, I bought a half dozen of these. And what I'll do is I'll give them away. If anybody is interested, just say you want in on the drawing, and I guess like next weekend I'll draw names, whoever wants in, and give out those 6. But they're well worth having if you can find them. like I said, they tend to sell out of them this time of year, and then they don't restock them. But I guess that's all. But canning is a good thing, especially when you get into a pressure canner. You can do so much with one of those. You know, they're well worth owning. It's nice if you can find an old one, but don't. You know, a lot of people I see go with those all-American ones, and I actually have one of them. I don't use it much. This is more convenient. So many of them have got all the toggles you got to open it and close it, and you know it's just kind of a nuisance. This is so simple and so straightforward, and so foolproof. You know that the only thing these use a rubber gasket for sealing, but the gaskets are always available, and I always keep an extra one on hand. But they carry those, so these are plenty fine. You know, you don't have to get an antique one. These work fine. But they really, once you get into using a pressure canner, the possibilities are just endless. Well, and other things you need, like these jar funnels, very handy to have. And these damn things for hauling the jars out of the canner. You know, they grip the lids to pull them up. You know, I know my sister one time, she was trying to can without one of them. It's tough. These things are very handy, and usually you can buy this stuff kind of as a set pretty cheap. But if you're interested in the book, like I say, I got a half dozen to give them away.